I was the worst player on the worst basketball team in the last 50 years. It's kind of like Bob Beeman's long jump record will never be broken. And that was a fantastic experience. And I loved basketball. But I quickly realized the only way I would get to the NBA was to get an accounting degree and possibly buy a team. Some days, 30, 40 years later, it happened. But I was not going to make it as a player for sure.
I love that. I was the worst player on the worst team. So I bought the team. Steve, we are so excited to have you on the show today. First, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Harry.
Now, I would love to start. We've recently seen the news about Atalanta, obviously getting the incredible news and performance in terms of the Europa League. I'd love to start with that. How does that feel? And how did Atalanta come about as a starting point? Let's start there.
Well, that's a great story. We're still on a high from the performance of Atalanta. I was in Bergamo about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago when we had this critical game. It seemed like it was out of Ted Lasso, basically. We had this critical game where we had to beat Monza. If we beat Monza, we'd finish in the top 5 and go to the Europa League. If we didn't, we would just stay in the Italian league. So huge game, huge excitement. Stadium was packed. And Monza's only about 45 minutes away, so it's a national rivalry. We went ahead at 1-0, then 2-0, then they scored. So very exciting game. We ended up winning the game and stormed the field, and it was incredible. I was there with my son and all the players jumping up and down and the fans jumping up and down. And so we'll play in the Europa League next year. We're very excited about that. How did that come about? I had a partner and a friend at Bain Capital who was Italian and knew the Italian league well, and he was friends of the Percassi family. And the Percassi family was looking around for an international partner. They wanted to kind of globalize the brand and wanted to find someone to help invest and build Atalanta to even bigger and better things. And so they contacted me through my partner, and I flew into Milan, and they picked me up. And as soon as I got there, I felt like I was at home. I have Italian-American heritage. My grandfather and grandmother came from a place called Morlicano, outside of Naples in the mountains. And so I immediately felt at home. I looked around, everybody looked like me, so I felt really good being Italian. And so I said, boy, this could be really interesting. And then really hit it off with the Percassi family. I wouldn't have made an investment in Italian soccer without great management, and they continue to manage the club, and we have kind of a 50-50 joint venture there. So we're all aligned, and we're trying to help with sponsorships and bringing in analytics. And we brought them over to see the Celtics and the analytics at the Celtics. The analytics people have come over there. So it's been very, very fun and synergistic for all of us. And now it culminates with getting into the Europa League, and hopefully we'll do even better next year. So we're very excited.
How did they sell the club to you when you were in those discussions? Was it something about the long-term future combined with the obviously great history that they have there, and then your involvement in being able to be a big part of that future hopeful success? There
were a lot of similarities to the Celtics. Atalanta has a fantastic team-oriented culture. It's really baked into the city. There's Atalanta signs everywhere. Restaurants have Atalanta signs. It's just incredible. So there are a lot of similarities, and we had similar views about building long-term success, creating value on and off the field, and just how to really drive a sustainable championship franchise. I was really attracted to it because they had invested millions of dollars in a fantastic academy that's in Bergamo, and has a catchment area in northern Italy where there are a lot of great soccer players. So we looked at the academy as an incredible resource. They have about 450 boys in the academy. For example, they have, I think, 5 of the 20 players. When we looked at the club, 5 of the 20 under 23 players in Italy came from the Atalanta system. The other teams contributed the other 15. The other 19 teams had 15. We had 5 of the players. So they've had an incredible record of investing in their academy and having people learn from a very young age on the Atalanta values and how to play the Atalanta way, and teamwork, and it's worked fantastically. So that's a real competitive edge that they have, and we're trying to build upon.
Can I ask, Steve, we're both from the world of like venture and private equity, where you invest and then you obviously manage the investment. The thing with football teams that strikes me and makes me a little bit nervous, and sports teams in general, is you invest and then there's ongoing capital requirements. It's a bit like marriage, it doesn't stop when you get married. I'm single, so don't worry. But my point being, do you worry? And how do you think about the ongoing capital requirements? And is that a difficult mindset shift compared to what we're used to?
Well, I think in all businesses you have to worry about capital. In Bain Capital companies, we invest in R&D, we invest in infrastructure. So I think you have to worry about it in all of them. Certainly in football and in basketball, you have to be aware that you might need to buy players, for example. You might need to fix the stadium, which we are doing at Atalanta. So we budget for that. And our philosophy is to try to not have capital calls to invest the capital that we make from the operations. And they've done a fantastic job in terms of trading players and having a net positive on that and being net positive on the income line as well. They own their own. They're one of the two, I think, Italian teams that own their own stadium, a beautiful stadium, which we're renovating one of the ends right now. They renovated the first end. And so it'll have luxury amenities for all the clients. But yes, you have to budget and plan for that, and we have to have capital reserve, and we have that both at Atalanta and the Celtics. When we first bought the Celtics, we promised folks that we would try not to have any capital calls, and so far in 20 years, we have not had one capital call.
Recruitment in football is obviously the big one that often gets well spoken of, and the money attributed to buying players now, particularly in Europe. When you're setting those budgets, do you look at it and sit down as a board and pick a percentage of the revenue, the money generated that you can then allocate to recruitment? Or does it quite often in clubs maybe that aren't right at the top of the league come down to what they can generate themselves within the player sales to then be able to go and spend again?
Yeah, we try to balance off over a longer period of time, so not year to year, but we try to look for kind of a net zero on sales versus acquisitions. Their record of developing players has been so good. They have an excess of players, and so they can sell players, and then we can use the money to buy other players. And they've also been the management team. Luca Percassi has been fantastic in really finding diamonds in the rough out there, and young players that they believe can progress. I was fortunate in that I was able to go on a visit to meet Rasmus Højlund, who. And when I looked at him, I thought I was looking at Jason Tatum on the Celtics. He was, 6'4", strong, 19-year-old, playing fantastically. He's from Denmark, but he was playing for Sturm Graz. So we flew into Austria and met him and his family. And by happenstance, I didn't know his mother and father were going to be there, but they were there. And his mother had done a program where she came to the high school in the U.S. and happened to be in New Hampshire. So she was a huge Celtics fan. I told them if Rasmus joined our team, they would have free Celtics tickets the rest of their lives, and she could take her friends from New Hampshire. And we spent 2 or 3 hours there talking about Atalanta and how Atalanta could help develop him and why he'd be such a great fit for the team. And we ended up 3 days later we signed him. We bought him for 20 million euros, and now he has had the record amount of goals for somebody under 20 years old in Serie A. So he had a fantastic season. He's a fantastic striker, and he was a big part of our success.
His name's popping up in the media a lot at the moment because of the lack of really good strikers, I think, in Europe. And you've got quite a few teams who are obviously looking for one. But I think that was something I was really interested to know, because the mentality of, let's say, in Atalanta, you're in a league with Juventus, AC Milan, Inter Milan. You're then looking across Europe and, the top clubs in all of those leagues. I'd imagine your longer term ambition is, to be one of those clubs. Is it a difficult balance then to, when the top clubs come calling for your best players, do you have to sit down and discuss and say, well, we've got an ambition to get there. We know the quality we've got. We don't want to sell it. But at the same time, you have to balance the financial challenges that you need to address as well. Is that a difficult thing for you to? That's
very difficult. But I guess we should hire you, Charlie, because you hit the nail on the head there. Basically, it's a balancing act, and so you want to optimize when you sell a player versus and how much you sell them for versus how many new players can you get to fill that void. So it is obviously hard to find star players. and we always want to have enough star players so we can win and compete with those named clubs. We think we are there. We've been in the Champions League several years. We're now in the Europa League, so we think we're there. But we've got to basically be very optimize our trading profiles so that we bring in great players to replace players who are moving on to other places, and do that balancing act every single day. Secondly, we have a great feeder system in the academy, and those players that just played for Italy in the under 23 group, some of them are coming up, and they'll be great players as well. So we look at the whole cycle. We have a board. How long will the players stay? What are the prices that people are offering for the players? Is there value there? How can we replace those players? Sometimes if you can sell a player for $60 million, you buy 3 new players for $20 million each, and you can keep your team competitive and still in the mix. But it's a very complex linear program.
Unlike Rasmus Højlund, Steve, Charlie is for sale. 10 quid and he's yours. Yeah.
I'm 6'5" as well, so his 6'4" is, for the Celtics or for Atalanta, I guess.
I hope, Charlie, I hope you have that blazing speed that he has as well.
No, I'm also 105 kilos, so that.
Oh, there you go.
No.
My question to you was, though, when you have these offers come in, I'm sorry, I'm really naive because we always hear about kind of transfer offer made. Who's it from? Is it from the agent to the club to the club? And then how do you internalize that? Does that come to the board? Does it go to the manager? Can you just take me to that process? Because it doesn't ever get discussed.
Yeah, it's all of the above. It comes in mainly from agents and sometimes clubs as well if they're asking for our players. And the way it works is it goes through the president, Luca Percassi, and Lee Congerton, our director of football operations, and they bring forward these certainly the smaller acquisitions. They do their own, but material acquisitions like Højlund, they'll bring forward to our board, and we will make a quick decision on it. Because sometimes the window is very short and there are clubs competing. So literally, Lee Congerton and Luca just basically stayed in Graz until they signed Højlund up because we really thought he was a great player.
And then when we have like a transfer fee or like an acquisition price, say 20 million, I know it varies a lot, but generally is that 20 million euros upfront, here you go? Is that 10 million and then 4 and 2? How do those cash payments look? I'm fascinated.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's bespoke, but it is normally over a period of time, maybe the period of time of the contract. So if it's a 4-year contract, you would pay $5 million a year for 4 years, then up to the 20 million. So when you're reading the papers that somebody bought Ronaldo for 100 million, it's 100 million, but sometimes it's over 6 years, 7 years. It's over time, and then you're also getting money back from the players you sold over time. And obviously, optimally, you want those to kind of net out to a positive or a neutral number.
I'm really interested in the motivations behind the Atalanta, as well as obviously the personal that you talked through in the relationships, because it's something we maybe can discuss in a bit. But if you look at some of the values of Premier League football clubs and some of the biggest clubs around, or even not some of the biggest clubs, you have some big sales last year going for 150 plus million in the Premier League. That seems to have got very expensive. Do you, with a finance investment hat, sporting portfolio as well, see a significant amount of untapped potential at the top of the game still outside of England in a lot of these European countries that have historic and fantastic clubs in their leagues?
Well, it's interesting. The Premier League has led the way with large salaries and big TV contracts and just like the NBA, the Premier League has really generated huge television ratings, and it's a global game. I love investing in sports in general because of just the challenge and applying a lot of these techniques to make the clubs better on the field and also in the operations. But basketball and football, as you know, we call it soccer, are global games. And there's been a revolution in the last 10 years of technology where I remember when I lived in Holland in 1977, I lived in Holland. I was a soccer fan, partly because there was nothing else. And in those days, there was no internet. There was telexes. There was spotty phone service. And so for me to follow sports in the United States, I would get a 3-day-old Herald Tribune that would have the scores of something that happened 3 days before. If I wanted to find out who won the World Series, I'd get it 2 or 3 days later in the Herald Tribune. So the world has really changed. And so when you used to count fans in the hundreds of thousands and millions, you're counting fans in the hundreds of millions now when you talk about clubs like Manchester United, Manchester City, because now sports is global. I watch every Atalanta game that's televised on Paramount Plus here in the United States. They're on at noon or 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoons and Saturdays and Fridays, and have a large following. So now the whole world is your oyster, and you can get global sponsors. Global international television rights have gone up dramatically, and so that's happening. And we felt like, first of all, the Italian league is a fantastic league. In fact, if you look at the Champions League final 8 teams, 3 teams were from Italy, 3 teams from the Premier League, I think 1 team from Spain and 1 team from France. And so the Italians are really, the league is really fantastic. And clubs like Napoli, are incredible, Milan, Inter Milan, Juventus, Atalanta. So the Italian league is really growing, and the viewership is growing, and I think TV revenues will grow. So I think there's still value there. The Premier League, that one's interesting because it was a very certainly a very, very high price for Chelsea, and I think that kind of lifted all the values. But the values are really driven by 2 things. One is scarcity, and the second is the kind of the economics, the television revenues, and the trading revenues that you can generate from the clubs. And so you've seen the Premier League really rise up. The question is how much further will it rise? It is based on that scarcity value, and it's based on what's going to happen with future television contracts.
Do you have a conversation as a group of clubs, as a collective and body, looking at how to maximize that value for Serie A?
Yes, Luca Percassi serves on the Serie A board and is the vice chairman, and they're in active discussions, saying how can we, because it's such a fantastic product, and now with the rise of the success of Italian teams in the Champions League, certainly everybody wants to see these teams. So the question is, how can we as a league really promote and get the product out there? Serie A has recently started an office in New York, so they're getting closer to the advertisers and sponsors. And so we think there's a bright future for both the Italian league, and then we think there's a bright future for Atalanta, because we can maximize the use of our stadium, the new seats that we're putting in, and amenities for fans.
Can I ask you, Steve, we both, again, come from investing landscape where often the market leader is the one where all value accrues. When we think about the distribution of value creation in sports teams, do we think that 99% of the value accrues to the 1%, Man U, Chelsea, Barcelona, Real Madrid, or do we think there's much more of a distributed wealth creation distribution within the value of football clubs?
That, again, is a great question. It's a pyramid. It's very different in Europe than it is in the United States. The United States teams don't get relegated, which reduces volatility, which I think increases value. And they're basically, if you have a team, you have it forever, and it represents that city. In Europe, you have teams going up and down, but you have with the buying and selling of players, you have kind of a feeder system, so that the middle clubs and lower clubs can compete on occasion. Certainly there's advantages to the large clubs that have those revenues to sustain those revenues. One issue the Premier League will face is with sovereigns, at least 2 sovereigns controlling clubs there, and also a third one rumored to be controlled by a sovereign. I think they really have to step back and say there's got to be some financial fair play or some rules so that you don't effectively have a league where there be 3 teams that always get in the Champions League, and then the other 17 teams are competing for one spot. I think that'll devalue the value of the other 17 teams, and even the top 3, because we've had great success in the NBA with competitive balance, with new champions coming in. This was a record year in terms of interest, with maybe 8 teams that could have won the championship that were very close series that are playing. So I really think the Premier League and the leagues in general are going to have to look at mechanisms to preserve competitive balance, so it doesn't become what you're saying, a winner-take-all game for very few clubs.
It's interesting. I think it's a good point, because I think that's what makes or has made the Premier League maybe what it is, particularly over the last 20 years when you look at the level of competition. I mean, this year you had Southampton, who went down bottom, finishing, a long way off safety, beating some of the top teams and actually playing fantastically well in those bigger games and really struggling against the smaller games. The competition part of it is brilliant because anyone can beat anyone. And it's certainly, added a lot of that excitement around those 38 games a season. But, that does come from the money that's fed into the league and the opportunities that's created. But I guess one of the questions that always intrigues me is, as you're looking to do that, then you're looking to be more ambitious and generate more of that revenue and maybe create more initiatives to do so. Does it ever come into conflict, you think, with what the fans want for the club? And if that is selling a player or if it's selling the naming rights of the stadium or something similar, do you feel that tension and do you have that thought process as a management team?
Absolutely. You always have to be responsive to the fans because we wouldn't be here unless it was for the fans. But I think the smart fans, that we have them certainly in Bergamo and Boston, they understand that it's a business and that you have to maximize for the long term. So if you have an opportunity to sell a player that will allow you to get 3 or 4 other players to make you more competitive for the long term, I think the fans ultimately understand that. And they've been very understanding in Bergamo. We've been welcomed and our strategies have been welcomed, and we have a fantastic, coach and management team. So far, it's been fantastic with the fans. Now, it goes very quickly. If you stop winning, it's less fantastic. So we have euphoria right now, but there's a lot of ups and downs in the business. But in general, we're trying to be competitive and be in the top echelon of Serie A every year. That makes our fans happy. That makes our sponsors happy. That then creates a virtuous circle where we get more sponsors and better television revenues and better amenities. So you just got to be on top of that and stay in that cycle and try to win for the long term.
What do you think are the biggest points of tension between fans and owners?
Well, the fans want to win, and owners have to have an opportunity that's economically viable. Unless you're a sovereign, sovereigns seem to be able to spend any amount they want to spend. That's why I circle back to saying they've really got to. I think to really have a robust, long-term, great league, you've got to have competitive balance. And I fear that will get out of whack if too many sovereigns are buying teams, and then just buying players. And so it becomes all about the money and all about the amount of losses. And eventually that's going to hurt the league.
Do you feel that there was a big cultural adjustment for you from a sports ownership perspective, going into an Italian football league from what you've experienced previously in the US?
Actually, there was less of one because Celtics fans are some of the most passionate and knowledgeable in the country. And we have some of the most critical newspapers and talk radio in the world. It's actually been more benign in Italy. I think because the Procastis have done a fantastic job in the community and in delivering a fantastic soccer team to the city. The city's kind of adopted Atalanta, and so far been very happy, and even happier now to be in Europa League. So it actually has been a great experience.
So you've seen the profile of the club rise in the US since you've taken the ownership and that link between the sporting portfolios has been established?
Yes, I think the whole Serie A is starting to rise. The office in New York has helped. Your football in the United States has grown. You've seen that Messi's coming into Miami, has chosen Miami. We've been waiting, for a long time in the United States for those leagues to have more prominence, and they are having more prominence now. And the purchase prices are very high for MLS teams, and certainly there's even been, I think the LA women's team is been valued at something like $300 million, which would be unheard of 10 years ago. So huge interest in football here in America now.
Can I ask, when you get critique in papers, you mentioned there about kind of the passionate Boston local papers. When you get critique in papers, whether it's Atalanta or whether it's Boston, and then you sit in the boardroom of the club, whatever club it may be, do you discuss what the world is saying about you, or is it a laser focus on what's in front of you?
It has to be a laser focus. The biggest mistake people make is if you start running clubs based on what the newspapers say, that's a kiss of death. And often new owners come in, I see it all the time, new owners come in the NBA or come into football and they want to make a splash. So they hire, they get a 39-year-old player who was good or a 36-year-old player who was good 4 years ago, big name, and then they're mediocre, and then they spend a lot of money and they kind of stay mediocre, and you can never win a championship. So you've got to really be focused on a championship. You've got to have a thick skin, and everybody has a right to their opinion, and they wouldn't be watching us if it was just watching paint dry. And I think the ownership needs to give the credit to the players and the coaches when we win, and when we lose, we have to take the blame. That's kind of our role. That's what we need to do, because we have both these clubs have fantastic staffs and players, and they're working very hard. The thing I realized when I came into sports from business is fans don't realize how hard, what a grind it is, and how hard these players play. Players play in the NBA 100 games. They're playing 60, 70 games in football, and sometimes 2-3 games a week when you're looking at different cups and different leagues. When the fans come in, they feel like every player is fresh, and every night they can go 110%. They're out there playing injured, banged up. I have huge respect for them, and our job is to support them and then take the slings and arrows and deal with them. And the hardest thing I found in both situations is we become very close to the players, and I'm a fan as well as an owner. So when some great player like Marcus Smart moves on to another team, it's kind of devastating for a few days, because you're losing someone that was so important to the franchise and so important to Boston. Really, you have to run it for the long term. So that's the hardest thing in sports, to see coaches move on to different places and to see players move on. But that's what makes it exciting.
You mentioned Messi there, and we spoke about kind of value accrual. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot, which is, rare given I'm a VC, so we rarely think at all, but is the question of value accrual in sports clubs or actually in the players themselves. Messi moving obviously to Inter Miami has actually structured the deal where a lot of the value accrues to himself because of the content that he will provide the league. My question is, do you think we'll see this value accrual move from club to actually player as a company as the next model in sports moving forward?
Well, I think it already has. The NBA pioneered a 50-50 structure where we're really in partnership with the players, and so 50% of the revenues go to the players. If it gets divided up, equally every year, and so that's, I think, fostered a whole era of partnership with the players, and they know that if the league succeeds, they succeed along with it. And so we've had really good relations the last 10 years. Adam Silver is an incredible commissioner, and we work with the players in partnership to make it a great league and make every game fantastic and every fan feel great about it. And he's invested in. They were very, very, very. David Stern and Adam were very ahead of the curve. They were investing 20 years ago when we got involved in the league in Europe and China. People thought they were crazy because there wasn't as much interest then. But that interest, I think we have $1 billion in the league coming in from outside revenues now from outside the United States, which would have been unheard of. People would say that's crazy 20 years ago. So I think it has happened that much more value is accruing to the players in the collective bargaining agreements. And this 50-50 partnership has worked really well for the NBA. The players are getting more and more because they can monetize themselves on social media, their own promotions, their own shoe deals. So it's certainly the model of the NBA, I think will be followed by other leagues. And I think it was a very smart move by MLS to cut the deal with Messi, because I think it'll lift all the values of all the clubs and all the teams.
Is that not a leaking of value for the teams in Europe, though? Suddenly, with more and more power moving to the individual and Messi proving that a new structure can exist in football, does that not lead to a transition of wealth away from club to player in a league that doesn't yet have it like the NBA does?
Well, the Messi deal is Messi himself is fairly unique. I was in Qatar to see him play. He is just incredible. Maybe comparable to Michael Jordan was in the NBA, how he can weave through, seems like 10 different guys and just, in a blur and score a goal. There are not many of those that can be transcendent. So I don't think it's going to change the whole structure. And I think it's actually going to lift all the boats, because when Messi does well, then there's more fans in the stands and there's more money to go to the other players. So I think Messi's just like Tiger Woods benefited golf. Michael Jordan, lifted the NBA, and Larry Bird lifted the NBA. I think Messi's going to lift MLS, and so everybody will benefit.
If you look at that deal, the brands that were also brought in, and that was pitched in an interesting way as well, because it wasn't just the contracts that he was signing with the league. It was, he gets an Apple deal, and then maybe a bump on the Adidas contract. Have you seen that within any of your negotiations with players at the Celtics, with an established NBA franchise behind you, and the players and how they navigate their conversations with you when they're going through their contracts?
We haven't seen that as much here in the United. That's unusual with Messi. The way it works in the NBA is players on their own right, cut deals with different companies for different promotions. And what's been great is that 20 years ago, without social media, without streaming, without global capabilities, it was really important for a lot of the players to be in the big markets because that's where they could get the best sponsorship deals. Now, social media and direct contact with players has changed all that. So you can become an incredibly famous player out of Milwaukee, Antetokounmpo, for example. He has fantastic sponsorships, as good as anybody. You don't have to be in New York or LA or Boston or one of the big cities. You can really prosper in the smaller markets as well. So, and that again has lifted the whole league because there's more competitive balance.
You mentioned before the globalization of the NBA, and countries now starting to take far more interest in the NBA actually moving some of its games into the UK, for example. Has that been a long time coming? Has that been a long-term strategy and it was about timing, or was that something that came about because there was a real need within the league or an apparent kind of understanding within the league that these games actually needed to be seen and witnessed firsthand?
It was a long-time strategy that David Stern and Adam Silver came up with. And again, when they did it, people thought they were crazy. Would anybody show up at a game in London? And I went to the O2 and it was packed. It's really increased the exposure of the game. Playing in China, playing we played in Istanbul. The Celtics played in Rome. I'll never forget that was the year we won the championship, and we had training camp in Rome, and we had a game in Rome. And I'll never forget that because only in Italy, when we were going to practice, we were on one side of Rome, kind of the north side of Rome. The practice facilities on the south side of Rome, and they would send every day with the bus 20 motorcycle police at rush hour and shut the entire center of Rome down as our bus went through. I can imagine there were a lot of mad Italians in these huge traffic jams because the bus was gliding through the center of Rome with an entourage of people on motorcycle bikes. And I remember one woman, flowing red hair, Italian woman, flowing red hair on the motorbike, police woman, saying, get out of the way, get out of the way. And the bus would come through and we'd make it to practice in 15 minutes, which it would normally take an hour if you had to go through that traffic. So it's a long-term strategy, and it has paid off now with that $1 billion of revenue coming in from outside the United States. They pioneered innovative things like forming a league in Africa. I think the Africa League is going to blossom and again increase the global view of basketball. Basketball and football / soccer are the two most global games, and they have the most to win from this globalization.
Can I ask about if we go back to the start of your time at the Celtics, because it links into the conversation that we were having around Atalanta and recognising opportunity and value. You've owned, or co-owned, the franchise for 20 years, and the value of those NBA teams since has gone up incredibly. What has driven that from your perspective? Has it been a collective operation? Has it been something you have done and the team around you with the Celtics, or is it a balance between the two? It's
definitely a balance, and I'd be lying to you if I said that I had any inclination. We did not. The group that was put together, Wick Grossbeck led the group, and he's one of my closest friends, and called me up and said would I be part of it, and I was honored to be part of it. And we did it out of a love of Boston and the game. And then we hadn't won a championship in 16 years, and that's in Boston you have to win championships. They're not there to finish second or third or fourth or fifth. You have to win championships. So interest was falling off. This first time ever I saw the stadium was only 80% full. The Garden was not rocking, and so we viewed this as to bring together a group of fantastic ownership that would bring it back to its glory. And at the time, the business was losing money. I think 27 of the 30 NBA teams was losing money because player salaries were higher than the revenues that were coming in. So I'd be lying to you if I said that I'd ever thought we could have these kind of value increases. I thought we could bring back the fans and put a great product on the floor and even win a championship. We had 3 goals when we bought the team. The first was to build a championship team, obviously. That's really hard to do. The second was to create the best fan experience possible. And so you can create a great fan experience even if you don't win the championship. So having higher engagement with the players, more things in the stadium, bring in the beginning, we wanted to attract people to the stadium, so we'd bring in rap backs and all sorts of things to create excitement inside the stadium. We invested $5 million in a huge jumbotron, which creates excitement as well. When social media came, and back in the day, emails, connectivity with fans. The third objective we had was to really use the Boston Celtics brand to help other people. So in philanthropic goals. So we set up, day one, the Boston Celtics Shamrock Foundation, and the ownership group, funded it with millions of dollars. And we've become one of the leading sports-based charities in the country. And we really work on things that will help underprivileged people get ahead. So especially children. And we've also formed something called Boston Celtics United for Social Justice to work on social justice issues. We've committed $25 million over the next 10 years to that effect from the ownership group. So those were the 3 objectives. And you can always accomplish 2 and 3. You can make it a better fan experience, and you can be great in the community. You can win every year of that. Winning on the court is very difficult. And we were fortunate to win a championship in 2008. And we've been contending ever since. We've been in the finals last year. We were in the semifinals this year. And we just made a big trade that hopefully will get us back there next year.
How was that? Can I just ask that moment, that winning moment for you 5 years after taking over? Was that must have been a feeling of incredible excitement?
Yeah, it was indescribable because 5 years. In my mind, I'm impatient. 5 years is a long time. There were plenty of teams that never experienced a championship. Boston's had 17 of them, and we're hopefully going to get an 18th at some point. So it was an incredible experience, and we really enjoyed it with our players and coaches and the management team that made it happen. I've never climbed Mount Everest, nor will I, but it felt like being on the top of Everest for a few moments that night.
Can I ask you, Steve, when you buy a sports team, you mentioned obviously the co-ownership for 20 years. When you buy a sports team, how does one buy it? We see quite big numbers. Again, is it cash up front? Is it a debt deal as well? And has that changed over time?
It really hasn't changed much, and it's basically cash up front. So, and now you have there's been alternate equity financing mechanisms developed. You have funds out there that can help, be part of a consortium. There was just a large purchase of the Washington Redskins by Josh Harris's group. So you need multiple investors and multiple sources of capital, and the NBA has been out ahead of that as well in allowing those sources to come in. Because it was a large. I think we paid the largest purchase price ever when we bought the team in 2003, which was $360 million. Teams are going in the $3 billion range right now, and so that's a challenge to come up with that much capital. The market for people that have cash $3 billion, the debt's very small. It's almost negligible. You have to have almost all equity. Same thing with something like Chelsea. It was almost all equity. So you have to have a lot of cash to buy a team now, which means you need more sources of cash. And ultimately, there may be public markets as these values keep growing.
So they will literally transfer $3 billion of cash.
You basically got to show up with somewhere that on that order of cash to buy a team these days.
Ooh,
Fortunately, we bought our team in 2003 for our ownership group. It's a little longer putt these days.
Yeah.
Was that a big gulp moment for you? Because I know you did obviously go for Chelsea. That is like one Hail Mary amount of money to move. Was that a real gulp moment? Because that's incredible, the amount of money you have to have.
It was tough to lose that, but there's always a silver lining. And because of being in the private equity so long in sports, I had a lot of folks that love Chelsea. And so we put together a fantastic group, which we're still very close to today with. and a bunch of those folks have invested in Atalanta. So we all bonded together in the Chelsea experience until the very last second when it flamed away from us. It was a challenge, but we got it done, and it shows it can be done, and it can be done by people who really want to do the same things I talked about. Invest in sports because of the thrill, but invest because of the community, and invest because it's going to grow in value because these are scarce assets, and it's the only must-see programming on television these days. I've been investing in media for 30 years now, and you see waves of things happening. There's bundling and then unbundling and then rebundling and unbundling. And we've now gone through a whole change in the landscape where everyone wants eyeballs. And to get eyeballs, just as you guys are getting eyeballs, you need content. And sports content is the most watched content, globally out there. And now you have, instead of television networks, you have streaming services, you have Google, you have Facebook, you have Apple, and the traditional networks competing for that programming, which has been great. Revenues program revenues have probably increased in the leagues, 7, 8, 9-fold over the period that we've owned the team. And I think that'll continue to happen because these companies, want those eyeballs on that screen.
I was going to ask about the vetting processes when you're actually buying these clubs, because it's one thing having the resource, and then it's another thing passing, I don't know what the right way is, the fit and proper test, or the guarantees that the leagues require that you're actually then going to be able to run this properly in the right way. How was that across the different assets that you've looked at? Is it very different from the NBA compared to Premier League to Serie A?
It's actually very similar. The leagues take it very seriously, and you have to show them your financial information and that you have the money. And they want you. They do interviews, and they want people that will be good stewards. The leagues basically, because there's such demand for these teams, it comes down to both price and then their belief that you will be a good steward. You only kind of own the team. The teams are really owned by the cities. It's a strange thing. It's a community asset as well as an asset. So it's not like you're buying a widget factory. You're buying something that has to stand in the community. And I think the leagues do a very, very good job trying to bring people in that are going to maximize that footprint and maximize the value and maximize the fan experience, because that's how the whole league grows and that's how you're successful. Luckily, I passed the test. We passed the test in 2003, but they do a pretty thorough investigation.
In other words, Charlie, Italians do let Americans buy clubs. Yeah, I know. It's what can I say? No, Steve, can I ask you, asset manager, you have a fiduciary responsibility, and other, PE firms do, and other owners have fiduciary responsibilities. When you see the value appreciation that some clubs like, Boston Celtics have done over the last 20 years, are you tempted to sell? Sorry.
Not me. I mean, people have different strategies. Some people are buying sports clubs to take advantage of the appreciation and then sell. They have a plan to do that. Our plan was always a lifelong, plan. So whenever this is sold, I will be in the ground somewhere looking upward at it. Ours was a very long-term plan, and it's been 20 years. It seems like yesterday. I'm just excited about waking up today. With what are the prospects for the future and our new players coming in and the draft choice that we have coming in, I'm just as excited as I was 20 years ago. So no, certainly our group was long-term, very long-term oriented.
Well, I wanted to ask a question on that because you mentioned excitement, and I'm guessing basketball's always been a passion of yours. But I was told by one of your close confidants to ask about a story once of the Duke basketball team and your role in it, and whether you care to shed some light in the story.
I don't know which story that is. I mean, I was the worst player on the worst Duke basketball team in the last 50 years. It's kind of like Bob Beeman's long jump record; it will never be broken. But I was fortunate to be on the freshman team for a couple of years of the junior varsity team, and that was a fantastic experience. And I loved basketball, but I quickly realized the only way I would get to the NBA was to get an accounting degree and possibly buy a team. Some days teams were only 15 million back in those days, but I was fortunate that 20, 30, 40 years later it happened. But I was not going to make it as a player for sure.
I love that. I was the worst player on the worst team So I bought the team.
you can look it up. It's definitely a fact. I think it's the only like 500 Duke team they've had, but it was really fun to be on and be part of it, and it's been a great lesson, and it helps you understand how hard it is to win championships for sure. And Duke has won a lot of championships, and I've been fortunate. I've been very lucky in my life that I happened to go to Duke, and it was a fantastic program. The Celtics are a fantastic group, and Bain Capital has been a great group. So I've been very fortunate to be really part of three things that are a lot bigger than me, where I could learn and grow and really have fun with fantastic people.
I was told that you are very, very good at spotting an opportunity, but then once you've spotted it, you actually then understand exactly how to pull everything together to make it work. And you were talking about those three objectives when you first bought the club and how you then go to ensuring that happens. What are your tricks? What's the special skill to actually doing that? And is there anything that stands out in your head that has made that such an important thing for you to be able to apply?
I think number one would be really focusing on getting the best, highest integrity and best people, which it's been a philosophy of Bain Capital since day one. It's really about the management teams, not about us. And then the second thing would be taking a non-political, fact-based approach to business, or the business of sports, or business in general, where you're really trying to look at the market and look at your situation and really get Bain Capital's believed in primary research and data. For example, when we got the Celtics, we did a big study of the basketball operation, and at the time it was more of a family business. They didn't have international scouts. They didn't go overlook internationally, and there have been a lot of players internationally. They didn't have a lot of computing and showing players plays on laptops. We increased the budget by about 7 times to get international scouts, to get technology in there, and then we built a large stats group, a la Moneyball, which we still have today. We call it the Basketball Intelligence Agency, the BIA. Teams are so good right now. It's all about that extra 1% edge on how you get a championship. So if you have a fantastic kind of analytic group that can do predictive modeling, I think we're on our 20th predictive model in terms of how a player will do out of college and translate into the NBA. If that allows us to, draft a player at number 11 who really is number 2 because we have a proprietary age, you're going to win. And so everything's kind of at the margin. So number one, hire the best people. Number 2, really do fact-based analysis and use all the tools at your disposal to try and win. And I think number 3, you always want to have an attitude of both business and sports, of giving back, because that creates a virtuous circle. You get more customers, you get more fans if you're really seen as and you actually do go out there and try to use either the business or the sports club, for the greater good. So I would say those would be the 3 things.
Steve, Charlie asked the nice questions, I asked the prying ones. What's the biggest bet that you've made in sports ownership? It could be new stadiums, new players, new strategy, new whatever, that didn't work out. What's the biggest bet that didn't work out?
I'll talk about it more generically. I think we probably brought in some star players that didn't work out, but more did work out than didn't work out, and that's always a hard thing. If you get it right 2/3 of the time, you're doing great. Both football and basketball are team sports. It's not one by one person, and you got to step back and say, what's the chemistry? We brought in our big 3, for example. That was a bet that worked. Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce. There's been other big 3s in the NBA that haven't worked. And so you've got to step back and say, will their chemistry be there? Will Kevin Garnett, who was scoring 27 a game, will he step back and let Ray Allen and Paul Pierce score more? And his scoring goes down to 17, but we win more as a team because we have balanced scoring. And he did that. If he hadn't done that, I don't think we win a championship. But he was the heart and soul of unselfish play. So I would say the biggest thing that doesn't work out is you make a big investment in a player. And so far, I'm knocking on wood. It was a big investment with Rasmus Højlund, and we got lucky. And that one looks really good. And we made a big investment in Lookman, and that looks really good. So I really credit Luca Percassi and Lee Congerton for what they've done in actually making those bets, and those bets have paid off. But you can't get it right every time. And the other thing I would say is, people undervalue continuity. If you the fourth thing would be, for example, we hired a fantastic Danny Ainge, a fantastic general manager. We hired Doc Rivers, and Paul Pierce got hurt in I think the second or third year, and he was our star player, and we lost about 50 games. We had two of our players hurt, and the press and the fans were calling to fire the coach, fire the general manager, sometimes fire the owner. Thank God the owner can't be fired. We stepped back and we looked at what they had done, and it's not their problem that Paul Pierce got injured, and we had catastrophic injury. So because of that, we got a great draft choice. We traded that draft choice to get Kevin Garnett, and within the next year, we won a championship after they were calling for the coach and the general manager and calling us incompetent. We won a championship. Again, if you get A players, you back them through thick and thin, you evaluate them, but you have to look at what the facts are, and you don't just fire people because the fans are demanding it. You have to fire people if they're not performing, but our people were performing, and so we've had, I think, only 3 coaches at the Celtics in the 20 years. We've had Atalanta is historic. I think our coach has been there for 8 years, and in the Premier League they're changing coaches like monthly. I think some of the clubs have had, I think one of the clubs had 9 coaches in 11 years there.
Yep.
Can I ask, when you have a player that's not working out, is there a review process for that decision? Like an investment that doesn't work out, you have a post-mortem often. Or for anything in a company, you have a post-mortem. When a player acquisition doesn't work out, does the board sit around and try and understand why, what happened, and analyze the situation, or is it an acceptance that 2/3 or half don't work out?
No, we definitely analyze everything, both why things worked out and why things didn't work out. You learn a lot more, as you know, Harry, when things don't work out. When things work out, if that shot goes in with a 1/10 of a second left and you win the game, you're a genius. If the shot doesn't go in, you're not a genius, and you're gnashing your teeth. But you learn a lot more, in the hard times. And so we try to analyze that. Was it a question of fit? Did we do enough due diligence on the player's character? Did we overestimate, their ability to get a better shot, whatever it is?
What's the number one reason why it doesn't work out?
I would say the number one reason why it doesn't work out is if the player can't fit in with the team in terms of the team chemistry. There have been plenty of teams with fantastic players, but they just can't play together because they're going for the next contract and they want to score more goals, and so they don't pass the ball off to a wide open guy. I think you have to have talent, and then you have to have kind of the security and the will to win and know that it's not just about you. There are many players that are happy to be the man and be the leading scorer, whether it be in soccer or basketball, of a mediocre team. That's the player we don't want. We want the player that says, I want to win. I need to make the other players better. If you get enough folks like that, then you have a winning team.
Are there similarities between the footballers that you've experienced at Atalanta and the basketball players in the US in how they approach these situations?
They have to be hardworking, talented, and then give up for the greater good. And both Atalanta has that culture and the Celtics have that culture. The great thing is that the day you walk onto the field at Atalanta, the coach is preaching teamwork, the general manager, the president, the owners, everybody's preaching. Everybody's got to do their part because you just can't win as one person. And in football, there's 11 people. In basketball, maybe one person can affect a little more, but there's a top 8 rotation. But at the end of the day, the teams that win are the teams that kind of can play together and a little bit check their egos at the door.
Charlie's ego's the problem here, Steve. Always too big for this relationship, I
don't know if you've probably heard of Bill Russell, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, but he was the epitome of kind of a selfless basketball player. He would block shots, get other people's shots. He probably could have scored 50 points a game every game that he went out there, but he made everybody better, and I think he won 11 championships in 13 years. It's unheard of. But you do that with unselfish play.
Steve, we could talk all day. I would love to move into a quick fire round. So we say a short statement and then you give us some immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
So what's your... I want to ask this one actually. Which other sports team owner do you most respect and why them?
I've always had a great relationship with the Crafts who really turned around the Patriots. I was a football fan as well myself, and what they've done has been extraordinary. Kind of winning so many championships over so many years, developing Tom Brady. I think Tom Brady was one of the last picks in the entire draft. I think he was 199th, and became the greatest quarterback of all time. So you've got to really respect what they did, and I saw that up close and personal in Boston. Living in Boston, all that period, and the pride and the things they've done for the community. So I have certainly a lot of respect for them.
Has the role of an owner changed?
I think it has. I think owners have realized that it is about a community asset, and you're somewhat thrust into the microscope of really having to be more than just an owner. You have to really be a community person and really use that engine that you have to help the community. And I think owners have stepped up and done that. We all the owners in the NBA started, I think, 14, 15 years ago, NBA Cares, which has been a huge, successful charitable effort throughout the globe. I've been down and they have a great program going to Africa where we build homes for people, and we put on clinics and basketball games for folks. My kids have all been down there building homes, and that's been a transformational experience for us and everybody in the NBA. So, and that has kind of led to the league in Africa. The NBA Cares effort really focused on development in Africa, 15, 20 years ago. And then all those relationships then has now turned into a NBA basketball league in Africa. So I think that's really important.
Steve, what's the biggest financial transaction you've pressed green button on in your 20 years of sports ownership? Is it the 20 million for Hoyland? Is it a stadium? Is it another player? Which is the biggest transfer of funds?
Well, there's been several of them. I mean, the NBA contracts for star players are kind of have gone up to close to 300 million now. So that's a big button. And we pressed that button with Jason Tatum, and I'm sure we're going to press that button again.
What do you do if you disagree? Say one person says, yeah, we should press that button, and the other person says, no, we shouldn't press that button.
I'll go back to what I said before. The way we solved that, and the kind of stemmed out of Bain and Company. I started that in 1982. We just keep getting more data and more data and more data, and normally if you bludgeon yourselves with data, kind of a consensus answer will emerge. The right answer will emerge. So we really haven't had in the 20 years we haven't had an issue where there's been a violent disagreement, because we're really aligned and we're data based, and you're not always right, but you try to make the best decision based on the facts that you have. But the key is to get a lot of facts and not run the club out of emotion, or not run the club out of what's in the newspapers, or if someone's going to criticize you. And Danny Ainge was fantastic at that. He, almost to a fault, he didn't care what anybody said. He made some incredibly bold, courageous moves, and he's still doing that today. That's the way you got to do it. You got to do what you think is right based on the data that you have.
What's your favorite sporting memory?
I've got a lot of them. I had two sons play for Duke, one play for Amherst, and Amherst won the national championship, and Duke won the national championship. So that was incredible to see them as part of that. And then obviously winning the Celtics championship was huge. And then I've been at many of the Patriots championships. I thought there'd only be one at the time, but I think there's been 5 or 6 of them. So those are really kind of transcendent moments. And I would say it was incredible a few weeks ago in that Monza game, because that was probably, in my 20 years, that may be one of the most important games ever played, because for the stakes that we had, you win that game, you're lifted up to the Europa League. There's financial reward. There's prestige. It attracts more players to Atalanta. You lose that game, it's back to the drawing board, trying to get back into the Europa League and the Champions League. So that was huge. I'm still on a high from that. I still have the pictures of being on the field with my son and the team and the fans going crazy. And what was really incredible is we had a couple of players that had been sold during the season. 2 of those players came back for this game. They weren't part of the club, but they came back for the game, and we brought them down on the field after we won the game, and the fans went crazy. Freuler, who was playing in England, came back. And I was like, wow, this is just incredible. 2 players that were sold, who were part of the team for a big part of the team for 3 or 4 years, came back to see their teammates, get into the Europa League, and that was incredible.
If I changed the question to the best sporting atmosphere, would that be your answer?
It's really hard to compare those. There's nothing. The Boston Garden is kind of like a church to me, and we've had some amazing times winning championship there. Same thing. It's so nice to own the stadium in Bergamo. The stadium is 25,000 seat, fantastic, laid out. You've watched many football games. The fans are singing the entire game, and lighting off smoke bombs and the whole thing. It's just fantastic. So I'd say they're right up there. Both of the experiences are you just get charged up, and then you want to come more.
I have to ask one. What went wrong at Chelsea, Steve? Like, what's happened? It's my club. What have they done wrong? I'm focused on Atalanta, so I'm not that close to that. So you're closer to it. Maybe you can give them some advice. The Stebbings brothers can step in with the plan. It was worth a try. Okay, we're going to do one more each, and then we're going to let you go. My one is, if you could buy any club in the world, any sport, which club would you buy and why?
I think the Boston Celtics would be, right up there. And fortunately, I am a co-owner of the Boston Celtics, so I think that would be fantastic, and it is fantastic.
And final one, who, before all the sports stuff began, who was your business idol? Who did you look up to the most?
People have done successes multiple times, and from just a pure business standpoint, if you step back, Thomas Edison, if you go way back, invented the light bulb, invented motion pictures, electricity, the electrical grid. He was probably one of the first people that did multiple huge breakthroughs and created businesses, around those breakthroughs. If you fast forward that into Steve Jobs, has done incredible. You may not like Elon Musk's politics, but Elon Musk has done amazing things, basically revolutionizing the electric car, space, boring tunnels. Like, most people can only do it once. Steve Jobs, at Apple, he did Pixar, he did Apple. Most people can only do it once. Those folks are up there in terms of having revolutionized industries and done it multiple times. And that's hard to do.
Steve, I absolutely love this. You can tell we play good cop, bad cop very well in our family. I so appreciate the time today. We've loved this. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's been great to be here with the Stebbings. It's good your name is Stebbings and not Stepping, because there's two of you.
Incredibly lucky. Thank you so much for that, Steve. Honestly, you were fantastic. Couldn't have asked for better. I hope you enjoyed it. You're amazing.
Thank you, Steve.
Great to be here.